In 1997, Cartoon Network introduced a block called Toonami, and it would change the Western anime landscape forever. For several years, it would introduce iconic shows to kids that never would have seen them otherwise. And in terms of vibes and aesthetics, it's quite possibly the coolest thing to ever exist. Now, I didn't grow up in the 90s, but Toonami actually had a very similar impact on me, just on Adult Swim instead.
So, how the new system's feeling?
I'm still working out the kinks.
I hear ya. It's good though, yeah?
Oh yes, I'm certainly not complaining.
Sweet. Well, time to start the show.
Yep, the channel block's second home. After a more child-oriented rebrand in the late 2000s, Toonami was cancelled until it found its way onto Adult Swim in 2012. Raw and uncut. It feels like no one talks about this era very much, but it makes sense. The internet was in full swing, services like Crunchyroll were on the rise, and because of that, anime fans had way more shows to choose from. Why watch one episode of some shows when you could watch any weird shit you want? But listen, I was finishing elementary school around this time. I dabbled in YouTube, sure, but I wasn't knee deep in the internet. So when I did eventually learn about anime, Toonami was the obvious choice, and I wouldn't have it any other way. I was absolutely obsessed with my favorite anime around 5th grade. I watched it, read it, played it, researched it. It was all I thought about. I have so many fond memories from this time in my life. Some of it is pretty funny though, and in this video, I just want to reminisce on this stuff with you guys. So with that, this is how I got into anime.
Only Toonami, Adult Swim.
Our tale begins in 4th grade, approximately, when I became friends with a kid named Jeremiah. He wasn't in my actual class, but I enjoyed hanging out with him when I could. We'd talk and play, but most importantly, he was the guy who introduced me to anime. He was really into Dragon Ball Z and Naruto, and he'd show me drawings he did of the characters. They seemed awesome, so I became pretty interested in what they were. Cause you gotta understand, I had never heard of anime in my life until that point. It's not like now where you can walk into a Walmart or Target and find anime merch on the shelves. So for us, it felt pretty obscure. With this newfound curiosity, I had to find out how I could watch these shows. I don't know the exact timeline of what I watched, but when it comes to Dragon Ball Z, I was able to watch it on Vortex. Yeah, remember this shit? Where my Vortex head's at. This was an action cartoon block on the CW, and it's what ended up replacing 4Kids, a much more infamous block that you're probably more familiar with. I actually watched 4Kids when I was little, exclusively because of Sonic X, and I was very upset when they stopped airing it. Anyways, Vortex aired Dragon Ball Z Kai, and I have a lot of memories of watching the Cell Saga. I haven't watched it in years, but I remember it being pretty fire, and it seems to be a fan favorite. When it comes to my current feelings regarding Dragon Ball, I have a lot of fondness for it. I love the world, characters, and the art is incredible, but it's not a franchise I latch onto as much as others I've gotten into since. I did enjoy a bit of the original Dragon Ball when I was a teenager though, so I ought to give that one another shot sometime. But what about this other mysterious show? Naruto. From everything my friends showed and told me, I knew I had to check it out. Turns out it aired on Adult Swim late at night, thus introducing me to the world of Toonami. I remember this very vividly. I was sitting in my room, scrubbing through the Dish channel guide when I came across it. I set it to record, and to my absolute luck, it started at the very first episode of the Chunin exam arc. This is such a cool thing because even though there was a whole arc before it, this episode feels a lot like a debut. You get a great introduction to the characters and world. I had no problem getting into the show this way. Plus, the Chunin exam arc just rocks. The Forest of Death, the one-on-one battles, I even like the stupid written test episodes. It was awesome, and I loved it. A lot. I'd watch these episodes over and over again, every week. I remember one time my parents and I got home from dinner and I decided to put on one of my recordings. It was the episode Sakura Blossoms, one of the more dramatic episodes, and upon getting to this scene, my dad was like, "What the hell is this?" And my mom begrudgingly goes, "It's one of his shows." I'm very sorry. But I can't exactly blame myself, because Naruto holds up amazingly. I know, hot take, but after years of never actually finishing the show, I finally did last year, and I loved it. I mean, I didn't bother with that massive chunk of filler at the end, but the fights are amazing, the ninja elements or whatever feel realistic and make sense, and Naruto is a genuinely inspiring character. The show was always one I'd revisit every so often, but as someone who's grown off shonen, it's nice to know that it's still great. I was also low-key sleeping on the waifu game in this one. We all know Tsunade, but the Forest of Death instructor and Kurenai? Shit man, how did I never notice? Another reason I never finished the show initially was actually due to Toonami itself. There's a part during the Chunin exams where Hinata fights her cousin Neji, and he beats the shit out of her. The end of the episode is made to look like she won't make it, and Toonami just never aired past it. Definitely a cliffhanger to stop on, but it would always loop back around to the first episode. I guess it wasn't all bad since I got to watch the first arc, but it was very strange. I hope I'm not imagining that. So yeah, Naruto gave me a lot of fond memories. Tons of laughs, tons of action, and some great suspense. A lot of the Chunin exam arc is very nostalgic to watch, as a lot of the lines and background music are burned into my mind. I can't really place what it was about Naruto that struck me so much, because I really was obsessed, but I'm glad it did, and I still love it to this day. That wasn't the theme song I heard on Toonami though. It was this. I have no idea what this is, but it's awesome. I'm also pretty confident in saying that Naruto got me into manga as well. Much like the term anime itself, I'm not sure how I found out about manga as a whole, but I certainly remember reading them. I wouldn't be surprised if these Zelda manga were the first ones I ever read, but I feel like Naruto kicked off my interest in them. However, I don't own much Naruto manga, because in order to read them as a kid, I used the power of the local public library. Like damn, looking back, this shit was cracked. Manga volumes aren't cheap, and both libraries I would go to had whole aisles full of great series. I would just go in there and check out whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted, for free. Incredible. I decided to revisit these old stomping grounds all these years later, and it was fun. The smaller, more nearby one I frequented has changed a lot, but when I think about how I haven't been there in a decade, obviously it's going to be remodeled. It looks like a totally different place, and while they still carried manga and anime, they didn't have a lot of what I remember getting. There was still good stuff though, including several volumes of Yatsuba, which was cool to see. This isn't a series I come across very often, so I decided to check out volume 1 to see what it's like, and it's really good. Just a funny, wholesome time. The larger library felt much more familiar, with some areas looking identical to how they did years ago. It definitely took me back, and they still have a lot of manga. One Piece, Naruto, Dragon Ball, you name it. They even had some newer favorites of mine like Spy Family and Love is War. There was also some Shaman King, which is one I read a bit of back then. I was glad to see that they still had a great selection. And who knows, maybe I rented some of these copies a decade ago. I read a ton of manga back then. Car rides, day trips, waiting rooms, school, you name it. I would check out some pretty random volumes too. I have one memory of sitting in a waiting room reading a copy of Naruto from like the Shippuden era. It was a bunch of Uchiha clan stuff I had no clue about, but I was reading it anyway, and I probably didn't care. When it comes to me busting out manga at school, I definitely did the whole, well, you know, you actually read this backwards, you see, because it's Japanese and they read backwards. Aren't I so cool for reading the backward book? Speaking of school though, the Naruto manga isn't the only piece of literature I read from the series. You see, my elementary school library held a treasure. It was this children's novelization of Naruto by Viz. That doesn't sound exciting, but when we found this thing, we were absolutely ecstatic. Like, Naruto in the school library? How? It was crazy stuff, and whoa, here it is. Haha, yeah, if you had this shit, instant top. I'm kidding, nobody cared. But we did, and this is the one we had. It's a very basic novelization of the first episode. There's a handful of pictures from the manga, and it's pretty censored. One of my favorite examples of this is the part where Naruto does the sexy jutsu in front of Iruka sensei. In the book, it just says that Naruto transforms into a cute girl with blonde ponytails. Yeah, let's just say I got a better idea of that when I watched the show. Pretty sure our library had some other volumes too, as I remember misreading Sasuke's name as Sasuke before I actually heard his name. Hilarious. Before I move on to the other big show I was into, I want to talk about some other shows I watched on Toonami, such as Inuyasha. Now, I definitely remember watching this one. I definitely remember recording it and watching it multiple times. But I don't remember a single detail about this show. I couldn't tell you about the premise, the characters' personalities, let alone any particular episodes. Hell, I even remember reading the manga sometimes, but I couldn't tell you anything about it either. However, I can tell you about why I stopped watching it. So one thing you have to know about me is that my parents, or my mom rather, were very vigilant of what I could and couldn't watch. So when it came to all those rating systems, I followed them like scripture. I got away with watching most of these anime by the technicality that most of the episodes are rated PG on the cable guide. Besides, violence had the most leniency anyway. But sex? Oh no, no sex. Sex? Not allowed. That's where the line was always drawn. Now, was this a good thing? Well, I'm not here to point fingers today. But hey, we all know that anime can get pretty horned up, which sets the stage for this little story. It was a typical Sunday morning for me. I was watching my Toonami recordings, one of which being Inuyasha. But this wasn't any episode. Oh no. This one had a bath scene. And it must have been too much for little old Ro because I turned it off and never watched it again. Listen, I very rarely pushed my luck when it came to stuff like this, but I struggle to remember if I turned it off out of fear of getting caught or sheer discomfort. But as embarrassing as it is, I feel like it was the latter. I never really liked seeing stuff like that when I was younger, so I might have backed out on my own volition. I was a good little boy. But hey, I'm making a video here, so I knew I had to find this scene again and show it to you. The only thing I remember is that it was set in a dark area, and some of the girls get caught naked or something. With that in mind, I think it was either episode 16 or 29, and I only know this from consulting the Anime Bath Wiki. Yes, this is a real website, and it is way too comprehensive. These people need to go outside. Although I must say, these scenes are pretty steamy. There's some exposed back, and even half a breast. Goodness me! I'm not really sure which one of these episodes I saw, but you get the idea. It was just too much for innocent, respectable young Ro, even if it's pretty tame looking back. Something very similar happened with, get this, Sword Art Online. Yes, I did in fact watch this show back then. Pretty much all discussion I see in regards to this show now is quite negative, with how it's a shitty wish fulfillment isekai and all that. But as a wee lad who had no clue what any of that meant, I was pretty excited about this show once Toonami started advertising it. You have this guy being transported into this video game world where if he dies in there, he dies in real life. How could I not resist? Like Inuyasha, I don't recall any specifics really, but I enjoyed watching it as it aired. That is until I reached episode 10. Basically, Kirito asks to stay the night with Asuna, and she thinks he wants to have sex? She then stands in the corner to undress, and I was not having any of it. I turned it off and never went back. Unlike Inuyasha though, I more clearly remember feeling outright uncomfortable when I saw this. But considering it stopped me from watching Sword Art Online, I suppose it's not a bad thing. Again, this is pretty tame in the grand scheme of things, especially with her tsundere reaction right after, but I don't think I even saw that part. My moral compass must have been pretty strong because I didn't let anything slide. I was like, no, I mustn't look. It's too inappropriate. I shan't view such vile things. I will say though, watching this scene now, it is awkward and kinda uncomfortable. The Inuyasha bath scenes are fine, but this, I kinda get why I turned it off. But enough breasts, let's talk about how cool Toonami looks. Now listen, I generally think Toonami had the most sauce in the early 2000s. What with the drum and bass music, awesome bumpers, the tom designs, pretty much everything about it is amazing. Cartoon Network and Adult Swim have great aesthetics too, but Toonami is on another level. When I was tuning into the block in 2013, we had Tom 5, and this era is a bit sleeker than anything before. Less bombastic, but it still has great vibes. Thanks to Junior on YouTube, I was able to go back to the exact point in time I was watching and revisit all the bumpers. It was especially cool seeing that familiar lineup screen all these years later. Plus, Toonami bumpers just have this way of making any show look like the coolest thing on planet Earth. This created some curiosity for certain anime I never got to watch, like Fullmetal Alchemist and especially Soul Eater. This show eluded me for a long time. I thought it looked super cool, even though I knew nothing about it. To this day, it has some of my favorite character designs in anime. I even have some vague memories of drawing stuff from Soul Eater, but I just never watched it. Not sure why really, maybe the rating was too high, but considering that first episode, I probably wouldn't have pushed my luck. I've since given the show a try in more recent years, but it didn't fully grip me. It struck me as a bit too shonen, which wasn't what I was looking for at the time. I want to love it a lot more though, so I'll have to give it another chance sometime. No hate.
Eat it.
Your soul is mine.
Only Toonami on Adult Swim.
If you couldn't tell by now, I absolutely loved watching Toonami. It was something I looked forward to every Sunday morning, and shows like Naruto became something I was passionately interested in. But one day, somehow, a certain show piqued my interest, and the rest is history. I was absolutely obsessed with One Piece during this time. Like, it was insane. I don't really know when or where I learned about the series, but it was a bit of an uphill battle convincing my mom to let me watch it. She obviously had no idea what it was, so when I asked if I could watch it, she had to look into the content herself. She said no, but I had a few aces up my sleeve. For one, I knew the show aired on 4Kids years ago. I wasn't aware of the dub, but since it was on 4Kids, surely it was fine. It was also rated PG on the cable guide, so I used these things to convince my mom to let me watch it. Was I being manipulative? Yes, but in my defense, a lot of earlier One Piece is pretty tame. There's a lot of skimpy outfits post-time skip, but aside from some violence, it's fine. I must have started One Piece right as Toonami started airing it again. The block ran the show for a long time, but when they reacquired it with the Funimation dub in 2013, they had to start pretty far in, and the arc they started with was, get this, the Foxy Pirates arc. Yeah, this isn't exactly the most beloved arc in the series. In fact, I never hear anybody talk about it. Out of the show's thousands of episodes, this is probably just a drop in the pond. Hell, it's probably not even the best part of the show I watched back then. But man, if I didn't love it. That opening theme is something else. Not only is it a banger, but it transports me right back to those early Sunday mornings, laying on the couch as the TV illuminated the living room, greeted every time by that familiar song. When I eventually heard it again years and years later, it was a pretty insane feeling. I could have cried. One Piece gave me a lot of memories, and this song encapsulates them. When you're a kid, you love and are fascinated by things in a unique way. It's unabashed because all the stuff is brand new to you. For me, it was media. The sense of wonder I got when I first played Ocarina of Time on my 3DS is probably similar to when I discovered the world of One Piece. One Piece has one of the most creative, vast, and whimsical worlds in fiction. To this day, I've barely scratched the surface of its story, but I didn't have to. This series was the coolest thing ever to me, and it was practically all I could think about. Like with Naruto, I'd rewatch my recorded episodes throughout the week, but I eventually went beyond that. When I was a kid, I loved reading wikis. Wikipedia, the Sonic Wiki, Zelda Dungeon, Bulbapedia, whatever, didn't matter. I loved learning about the things I loved, and One Piece had to be the motherlode of them all. I spent so much time digging around wikis on my grandma's computer, reading about characters and arcs I never and would never see. Alabasta, Skypiea, timeskip character redesigns, Boa Hancock. This probably had residual effects on my psyche. It was an endless pool of information that I could drown in all day. It didn't matter that I never formally watched the show from the beginning. I fell in love with these characters and became so curious about the world regardless of what I got to watch. The Foxy Pirates arc was good fun and all, but it also led into stuff like the fight between Usopp and Luffy, Water 7, and eventually Enies Lobby. I never quite got to Enies Lobby on Toonami, but I do have a DVD from this arc. This came my way as a birthday gift from a family friend. He heard I liked the show, and this is what they had at Walmart apparently. I also have this DVD from earlier in the series. I probably got it on eBay, and it's from the Logue Town arc. I know I specifically got this because of Captain Smoker, a villain who intrigued me a lot. I even dressed up as him for Halloween once. Fully homemade, and my grandparents helped make a bunch of fake cigars out of wood. Pretty cool, and absolutely nobody knew who I was. Obviously. I can also shout out a website called watchop.com, which was my go-to way of watching older One Piece episodes. A lot of anime, browser, streaming websites weren't super functional for me at the time, but this one was very convenient. It had all the episodes listed out on a page, and it just worked. I have memories of watching East Blue stuff, as well as other random episodes that piqued my interest on this site. It's long gone now, but a great site nonetheless. So yeah, I was knee-deep into my One Piece fanaticism. It was my new favorite thing, so I had to share it with other people, of course. Because for me, at that age, at that time, at my school, One Piece was virtually unknown. So you know what I did? You want to know what I did to spread the gospel of One Piece to my classmates? I felt the need to create and hand out flyers that straight up advertise the show. I am not kidding. Basically, I printed out enough of these things to hand out to certain people I knew during recess. Now, I didn't keep any of these, and I unfortunately don't have a photo of them either. The only thing I could find was this. It appears to be a picture of a monitor, but this is the image I used for the flyer. I just added text around the border. I described what it was, what time, what channel it came on, and even a little content warning. But that was part of why I sort of got in trouble for doing this. There was one person I decided to give a flyer to that I wasn't as close with, and he ended up giving it back to my teacher, who called me over to ask me about it. She was like, "Are you staying up this late to watch this stuff?" And I was like, "No, I recorded and watched it the next day." Which was true. This was on the first day of 5th grade, by the way, and I always felt like I made a bad impression on her. It's one of the dumbest things I've ever done, but it's just so funny. I have to be the only person to have ever done that. And if I'm not, you have my respect. Like with Naruto, I don't own a ton of One Piece manga, but I do have these sick 3-volume sets covering all of East Blue. They're great packages, and I read them religiously. I took them everywhere and burned through them over and over again. Definitely some of my favorite manga I own. For some reason, I also own this copy of Volume 22. Not sure why I got this. It's from the Alabasta arc, and Nami was low-key my first waifu? I'm pretty sure she planted a seed in my mind or something. There was one time where I was watching a tutorial video on YouTube, and this was the person's wallpaper. Yes, this exact image. And the only thing I could think was just, oh, that's definitely something. Still a goated anime girl though, even if my heart belongs to someone else these days. One other thing I have to talk about is the 4Kids dub. It's one of the most infamous dubs in all of anime, and I actually had some passionate opinions about it back in this time. I remember constantly watching this specific YouTube video showcasing the visual censorship 4Kids did. Not only was I fascinated by how extreme it was, but it had the 6 opening theme in the background, and that's a freaking banger. To this day, I'm still baffled by the sheer fact that this dub exists. There's tons of bad dubs of popular shows from this time, but when it comes to something like, I don't know, Sailor Moon, it was always a kid's show. The dub just added cousins and hilariously butchered the dialogue.
Uranus, are you going to help her? No.
But with One Piece, this series has always been for like pre-teens at the least. So to have 4Kids look at this and go, yeah, let's localize this for small children, it's just insane. Not only were massive chunks of the narrative completely removed and altered for content, but the edits are ridiculous. The alcohol is recolored, Sanji's cigarette is changed to a lollipop, the rifles are redrawn to look like f***ing water guns, and all cleavage is erased because boobs don't exist. Nope, not at all. Can't have any of that. The most baffling alteration for me though is the insistent removal of any Japanese kanji. I genuinely never understood the reason for this. Like, are kids not allowed to be exposed to foreign languages or something? Like, y'all clown on the jelly donut shit from Pokemon, but this is on another level. The sheer effort 4Kids went through to butcher this down to a Y7 rating just it never made sense to me. You could have dubbed anything else, but you chose something with bloody fights, smoking, massive honkers, and worst of all, rice balls. Before I close things out, I think there's something to be said about starting these shows at random points when you're a kid. Nowadays, why would I want to start something several seasons in? That's stupid. But when I was a kid, I didn't care. I was just happy to be watching these shows. And to be honest, I don't have too many memories of being confused by these stories. With Naruto and One Piece, it was super easy to get a feel for these characters. Right from the first episodes I watched, you could tell how these characters acted. Cell Saga, the Chunin exams, Long Ring Long, didn't matter. It was kind of fun piecing everything together and filling in the gaps. The worlds these shows presented were so rich with creativity, and they tapped into this unique sense of wonder that I couldn't get from other shows. This anime thing was totally new to me, and I had a blast exploring it back then. But hey, I'm not the only one who grew up watching Toonami, so I decided to bring on a special guest to talk about their own memories with the block. So tell me, how and when did you get into Toonami?
Well, it mostly started with my uncle, an insane man. He had a pen pal who lived in Japan, and they would send each other all kinds of like stuff all the time, and he would get anime VHS tapes. And I would watch like the most insane, crazy stuff. None of it had subtitles. I had no idea what was going on. But you know, he was already a big fan of anime, and he had, I would want to say not hundreds, but like a lot of tapes of Toonami, pretty much from back when it started in the 90s. And he'd be like, yeah, here, it's got Dragon Ball Z and Inuyasha and Sailor Moon and all that. So I didn't watch a lot of early Toonami as it was airing, but I watched a lot of it that he had recorded, and that was huge.
So your introduction was tapes, but when did you watch it on air?
It had to have been like anywhere from 2004 to basically the years right before Tom became ugly. So I watched a lot of Tom 2. Tom 2 was a lot of what I grew up with watching on TV, because a lot of that played at like 3 or 4 p.m. So it's like as soon as I'm home from elementary school, then it's like, oh, well, Dragon Ball is going to be on, Sailor Moon, Inuyasha, all those shows. I remember they did Giant Robot Week. I was really looking forward to that, because Gundam, which I was familiar with already, but I wanted to actually know what was happening. And this crazy little show I had never heard of called Neon Genesis Evangelion. I didn't get it. They only played the first like 3 episodes, heavily censored, and I did not get it at all. I was like, I don't care.
I can't even fathom that. Like, was it the ADV dub cut down? Mm-hmm. That's crazy.
Yes. Yeah, it was just the ADV dub.
That's so weird. Like censored. They were probably just like, man, the show's so cool. Let's just freaking air it anyway. Just cut it
Yeah,
down. Like, who cares?
that's what Toonami was back in the day. It was just a bunch of anime nerds at Adult Swim, and they were like, yeah, let's just do it.
That's one of the coolest things about Toonami, like watching the old bumpers. It just felt like such a passion project with like the game reviews. They had base takes.
Yes.
They had good takes. They gave like Wind Waker a 5 out of 5. Like when it came out, I'm like, yeah, they knew it was one of the best Zeldas. To put our age into perspective, how old were you when you were watching Toonami in 2004?
I was like 5. I'd get home from whatever grade.
Actually,
probably
5 is younger than I would have thought for Toonami.
Because again, it was on, and I so distinctly remember when you're that young, if something leaves an impression on you, it's gonna stick. And Sailor Moon and Dragon Ball, those left impressions on me. And even though I had no idea what was going on, I was glued to my TV whenever those. Yeah.
What are some of your favorite memories of Toonami from like the 2000s?
It's really funny. It's always kind of stuck with me, right? So like my mother was pretty restrictive over like what I watched, and so but Dragon Ball, Sailor Moon, and Yasha, that was all fine. But for some reason, it was One Piece that she had a problem with, and she never really gave me a reason why. I just remember really wanting to watch it because I thought pirates were really cool. And she watched just a little bit, and it was 4Kids at the time. This was during the 4Kids dub of it. She was like, I don't know about this one, Jeff. But I remember there would be times where I would watch it and like bath scenes or something would happen, and I'd always be like,
they put towels on them and shit. Like,
yeah, but like still, even with the censoring, like there was a Sailor Moon episode where I think like Usagi was in a bathtub, and even though it was censored, I was still like, oh. I make sure my mom's not around.
One big thing for me when I got into Toonami in the early 2010s was like no one at my school knew what anime was. Did you kind of have that same experience? Did you have friends that were into anime, or did you have to tell them about it?
At that time, I was in elementary school, and no, like none of my elementary school friends cared. It wasn't. They were all talking about. I don't fucking know what they were talking about. There wasn't anime. I tried to show him. I remember I brought a friend over to watch Dragon Ball, and he did not. He just didn't care.
Yeah. I had the same experience with One Piece. I got a DVD of it. It was like Enos Lobby, and I'm like watching it with like my best friend, and my best friend he was like, "This is weird."
The whole anime thing didn't start picking up until I was in middle school, and at that point, that was like post reboot. That was 2013. So that's when like you could just as easily stream stuff.
But speaking of streaming, where was like anime at that time? Like, how did people consume it primarily?
DVDs were still huge for anime, and it would always be like, here's the random show volume 1, and then there's like 50 other volumes that you had to buy. It was either that, or maybe Netflix would just dump something. I remember Netflix had Death Note for a really long time in like the early 2010s. That was a huge deal because that got a lot of people to watch it. I don't quite remember if this was pre Crunchyroll. Crunchyroll didn't slither their way in until a bit later, I believe. But at this time in like middle school, what I knew people did the most was go to like kissanime.com. It wasn't even like torrenting and downloading and pirating. It was browser streaming online. And those websites get cracked down so hard today, but back then Kiss Anime was like a beast. It was.
No, I went on there back then, but it just never worked. Like, I don't know if it was like my internet at the time, but like it would just never work. Like, I would click it and switch the players around. It would just never work. We can close out with the current state of Toonami because I know you have thoughts of that.
It's sad. It's just sad. If you've checked out Toonami at all recently, it's either Rick and Morty the anime, or it's like an original show that is just terrible. And they've had good ones. They had a horror anime called Housing Complex C. It was like 5 episodes, and it was like a fun little thriller mystery show, and I enjoyed that. But we all know the obvious elephant in the room, Uzumaki. a disaster, a overblown, overhyped trash fire of a 4-episode show. The first episode looked incredible, and then the rest of it, well, I don't know who to blame. Do I blame the guy who runs Warner Brothers because Warner Brothers is Adult Swim is Toonami? Do I blame Jason DeMarco because he just seems like he doesn't really know what he's doing anymore? Do we really need 4 Fully Cooley sequels?
Come on, bro. Fully Cooley shoegaze. Shoegaze.
So I don't have any faith in Toonami originals anymore because they have Blade Runner Black Lotus, the CG Blade Runner anime. Terrible. Rick and Morty the anime? Dude.
It's the greatest show of all time.
Dude. Some people listening to this, watching this video, might think I'm joking. I'm not. It's real, you guys.
But yeah, I think my final thing will be, what shows that Toonami introduced you to have stuck with you the most?
I love Sailor Moon. Yeah, Sailor Moon was a big one because it was that when I first saw it, I went, cooties, girls. And then actually like keeping it on the TV, I was like, oh wait, that's really cool. So obviously Sailor Moon and Dragon Ball, 2 shows I still hold very close to me. Toonami introduced those to me. But it's also some of the more like obscure stuff, like Hamtaro. Toonami played Hamtaro, and it was really weird to air it because it would be like when they first did the promo introducing it, it was just him staring at a screen going like, okay, I guess they're cute. Hamtaro coming to Toonami. I think the thing I like the most about Toonami that'll always stick with is, even through its ups and downs, Tom's a really cool guy.
Tom, it's
what
so
a design, man.
It's so awesome. Like, I really can't think of any other block or channel or like mascot that's anything like him or Toonami.
Exactly.
It's one of those things that's just cool to anybody without trying to pander to like children. Like, it just feels like it has that passion. Like, let's just make something cool and air these weird shows that none of these people have seen. Like, that's the magic of Toonami, you know? There came a day where I stopped watching Toonami. No reason. I probably just moved on to the next thing. The amount of anime I watched got a bit slimmer, but there were still some shows I watched throughout middle and high school. OG Dragon Ball was one. Naruto was something I'd still return to. Dragon Ball Super was straight ass, and I did get into My Hero Academia for a bit. I enjoyed it, but I don't vouch for it these days. Momo was my second waifu though. But one fateful day in 2020, I decided to watch Sailor Moon, and it completely reignited my love of anime. After years of never finishing a single series, this one became the first, even with that goofy-ass 4th season. From then on, I watched a lot more anime, and I've made a ton of new favorites. Cowboy Bebop, Evangelion, Love is War, Spy Family, I Am in Love with Your Forger. Meanwhile, shows like Mob Psycho 100 completely redefined what a shonen could be. I always knew there was more to anime than just action, and getting to explore new stuff in recent years has been great. I don't think anime was ever something I really grew out of. I always had a fondness for it, even during the times I wasn't watching much. But now I've expanded my taste so much, and I owe it all to Toonami. Seeing anime for the first time was a pretty magical experience. It felt so different, so cool. There was nothing quite like Naruto or One Piece for me. I find it so fascinating that even though this era of Toonami was somewhat irrelevant, it still did the same thing it did when it began. It introduced me to anime, and I will always cherish that. Thanks, Tom. You're a real one.
Hopefully, we've left you with some good memories. So, until we meet again, stay gold.
I mean, I don't know any straight people who like Sailor Moon, so.